The rescue team recovered Elias Vane near the southern evacuation roads 3 days after the Black Ridge incident. He was alone. Severe psychological trauma was noted during every interview. He repeated the same sentence over and over again. The surface was never real. Snow drifted endlessly across the mountainside as Elias stumbled through the storm, with blood running from cracked fingers and frozen breath tearing through his lungs. Somewhere behind him, deep beneath Black Ridge, something was still breathing. The bunker no longer felt distant. Even outside the mountain, Elias could still feel its presence pressing against the edges of his thoughts, like a living pressure buried beneath the earth itself. Emergency sirens echoed faintly through the storm behind him, and from time to time he thought he could still hear elevator machinery groaning beneath the snow. But the worst moments always came when the sounds disappeared. That was when the voices returned. At first, Elias believed exhaustion was finally destroying what remained of his mind. The road stretched endlessly through snow-covered forest, military barricades buried beneath ice, and abandoned transport vehicles, half swallowed by drifts. Yet every few minutes, something around him felt subtly wrong. The same warning sign appeared more than once. A frozen crow near the roadside seemed to change position every time he passed it. Tire tracks vanished abruptly into untouched snow. The world itself no longer felt stable. And then the hallucinations began again. The snow beneath his boots became metal flooring for only a second before returning to ice and asphalt. The freezing wind transformed into the low, mechanical breathing of underground ventilation systems. Once, while crossing a narrow bend in the road, the trees around him disappeared completely, and he found himself standing inside one of the lower corridors again, seawater dripping from rusted pipes while red emergency lights pulsed overhead. Then the vision vanished. Road again, storm again, night again. Elias nearly collapsed every time reality shifted around him. At some point during the descent beneath Sector C, his perception of the world had stopped functioning normally. The hallucinations were no longer random flashes of fear or exhaustion. They had structure, intention, purpose. And slowly, as he forced himself farther from the mountain, Elias began to understand what the thing beneath Black Ridge had truly been doing to them. It had never tried to kill them. It had tried to keep them. The realization arrived painfully, like waking from anesthesia after a long surgery. Every impossible corridor, every familiar voice echoing through the darkness, every false memory and comforting hallucination had all served the same purpose. The entity beneath the mountain had been building a prison from memory itself, a world shaped from grief, fear, guilt, and longing, a place where people stopped wanting to leave. The memory of Sergeant Vale suddenly resurfaced with horrifying clarity. Elias remembered sitting across from him in the cafeteria, sharing coffee beneath flickering fluorescent lights, while alarms echoed faintly somewhere deeper in the complex. Only now Elias remembered something else. Vale had already been dead. He had watched him bleed out near elevator shaft 2 during the first descent. Yet afterward, Elias had continued speaking with him for days. The memory made his stomach twist violently. He collapsed into the snow beside the road and vomited as more fractured recollections surfaced inside his mind. Entire conversations that had never happened. Entire rooms that could not possibly exist. Faces of dead personnel calmly walking through corridors long after their bodies had been recovered. The thing beneath Black Ridge had not forced hallucinations onto them. It had convinced them to accept them. That was how it trapped people. The farther Elias walked through the storm, the more desperate the hallucinations became. He heard voices constantly now. Some called his name softly from the trees, while others echoed from behind abandoned vehicles along the roadside. Several times he heard his recovery team speaking casually behind him, as though nothing had happened beneath the mountain at all. Laughing, talking, alive again. The temptation to turn around became almost unbearable, because the voices sounded real, not distorted, not monstrous, human, familiar, lonely. Elias eventually understood the cruelest part of the entity's influence. It did not prey upon fear alone. It studied guilt. It used memory like bait. Every hallucination became shaped around whatever would make a person stay willingly. And part of Elias still wanted to believe the voices behind him were real. The storm worsened as night deepened across the valley roads. Snow moved in heavy waves through the darkness, while distant floodlights flickered somewhere farther down the evacuation route. Elias focused entirely on physical sensation to keep himself grounded. The pain in his feet, the freezing air tearing through his lungs, the sting of blood drying across his hands. Pain felt real. Pain became proof. Hours later, he reached the outer military checkpoint near the Southern Ridge roads, or what remained of it. Floodlights illuminated abandoned barricades buried beneath snow, while military trucks sat motionless with doors hanging open. Portable communication towers leaned under the weight of ice, their warning lights blinking weakly against the storm. Bodies lay scattered near the command tents. Some were partially buried beneath snowdrifts, while others remained frozen exactly where they had fallen. None showed visible wounds. Their expressions alone were enough to make Elias hesitate. Every face carried the same look of absolute terror. Inside the first command tent, maps and evacuation reports covered folding tables beneath dim emergency lighting. Most of the papers had been ruined by moisture, but one line written across a recovery log remained visible. Subject Vane still inside. Elias stared at the words for several seconds without breathing. The ink looked fresh. Beside the paperwork, a radio hissed softly through static. Then a woman's exhausted voice emerged from the speaker. Recovery Unit 4 reporting. We found him near the Ridge Road. He does not respond to commands. He keeps looking behind him. Elias slowly backed away from the table. The voice continued. He appears unaware of our presence. Outside the tent, footsteps moved through the snow. Shapes passed beyond the canvas walls. Soldiers, several of them. Their silhouettes crossed between the floodlights, carrying rifles pointed toward the tent itself. The radio crackled again. He is inside the command post now. Cold panic spread through Elias's chest. He still believes he escaped. The transmission ended abruptly. For several seconds, Elias stood frozen in silence before stumbling out of the tent into the storm again. The checkpoint around him suddenly felt unreal in a different way than the bunker had. Not distorted, not impossible, observed. As though something was carefully reconstructing reality around him while he moved through it. Near the far barricade, he discovered a small inspection booth, partially buried beneath snow. A dead soldier sat slumped against the window inside with one hand resting on a clipboard. Elias approached cautiously, unable to explain why the body disturbed him so deeply. Something about the stillness felt deliberate. He forced himself to take the clipboard. Most of the recovery report had become unreadable from water damage, but the final line remained visible. "Do not let him reach the lights." The soldier moved, only slightly. His head turned enough for Elias to see the face beneath the frost-covered helmet. It was his own, older, eyes black with seawater, mouth opening far wider than any human mouth should open. Elias stumbled backward and dropped the clipboard into the snow. The figure inside the booth pressed one hand slowly against the shattered glass, while its lips moved silently. Then the floodlights around the checkpoint failed all at once. Darkness swallowed the valley. Elias ran. The storm consumed everything beyond a few feet of visibility, while the world around him shifted constantly between reality and hallucination. At times, the road beneath him became flooded metal corridors again. Other moments revealed fragments of impossible places hidden beneath the mountain, a stairwell descending endlessly downward, rows of empty observation chairs facing black glass, the underground shoreline beneath a starless sky, hallways lined with boots, but no bodies. The boundaries between the real world and the lower levels had begun collapsing completely. Yet despite the terror overwhelming him, Elias finally understood something important. The entity was losing control. The hallucinations no longer held together properly. They flickered too quickly. Places overlapped. Voices contradicted themselves. The farther Elias moved from Black Ridge, the more unstable the illusions became. That made the thing beneath the mountain desperate, and desperation made it dangerous. The road eventually led toward a lonely service station sitting near the edge of the evacuation zone. Warm yellow light glowed behind frost-covered windows, while snow collected around silent fuel pumps beneath a swinging roadside sign. The building looked untouched, normal, safe. Elias stopped at the edge of the parking lot for a long time before approaching. He already knew what the service station truly was before stepping inside. Another cage, another attempt to make him stay. The door opened softly beneath his hand. Warm air wrapped around him immediately. The smell of coffee drifted through the quiet building while soft music played somewhere overhead. A woman stood behind the counter preparing drinks while a man sat near the window, reading beneath dim ceiling lights. Everything looked painfully ordinary. The man near the window slowly lowered his newspaper. Sergeant Vale looked back at him calmly, alive, unwounded, waiting. For several seconds, Elias nearly broke. The exhaustion inside him felt unbearable now. His body trembled from cold and sleep deprivation, while the warm lights of the station wrapped around his thoughts like a blanket. Even the silence inside felt comforting after the endless storm outside. The woman behind the counter smiled softly. No one spoke. They did not need to. The offer was obvious: rest, warmth, company, an end to loneliness, an end to fear. Elias stepped farther into the room before noticing the reflection in the window behind Vale. The service station did not exist in the glass. Instead, Elias saw a massive underground chamber lit by deep red emergency lighting. Hundreds of people stood motionless inside the darkness, with empty expressions frozen across their faces, waiting, dreaming, trapped. The warm atmosphere inside the station immediately began changing around him. The lights dimmed slightly while the walls stretched longer than they should have. Water dripped somewhere far away in the darkness beyond the booths. Vale slowly stood from his chair. His face changed subtly every few seconds. Soldier, scientist, corpse, stranger. Then Elias himself. The thing beneath Black Ridge was no longer hiding what it truly was. And for the first time, Elias understood something terrifying. The entity was not imitating human behavior poorly. It had learned humanity by studying trapped minds from the inside. Every comforting voice, every familiar memory, every moment of kindness. All of it had been copied from people buried beneath the mountain. "You are not them," Elias whispered. The room shuddered violently. The service station stretched into impossible length, while booths and tables disappeared backward into darkness. Warm lights transformed into red emergency flashes, reflecting across black seawater spreading over the floor. The entity's presence pressed against Elias from every direction now. Huge, ancient, buried. Not a physical body, but something vast enough to fill the entire mountain itself. And beneath the terror, Elias felt something else hidden inside the creature. Loneliness. A loneliness so old and enormous, it no longer resembled human emotion at all. The thing beneath Black Ridge had spent centuries buried in darkness, without thought, language, or companionship. Human minds entering the lower levels had given it something it had never possessed before: connection, memory, presence. And once it discovered consciousness, it became unable to let it go. The entity did not understand love, mercy, or individuality the way humans did. It only understood the unbearable silence waiting for it beneath the earth whenever people left. So it created worlds from memory, false places where nobody ever had to disappear, false realities where the dead still spoke, false comfort built from stolen minds. For one terrible moment, Elias pitied it, and that was exactly what the thing wanted. The hallucinations intensified instantly. The lower levels unfolded around him again, while every voice from the bunker echoed through the darkness at once. Dead personnel appeared along the flooded corridors, watching him silently. Sergeant Vale stood among them near the shoreline beneath the underground ocean, his expression calm and almost pleading. The entity showed Elias a world where nobody beneath Black Ridge had truly died. A world where they all remained together forever. The temptation nearly broke him. But then Elias saw the truth hidden beneath the illusion. Bodies frozen behind sealed blast doors, scratches covering concrete walls, empty uniforms lying beside black seawater. Human beings trapped so deeply inside hallucinations that their physical bodies no longer mattered. The entity had mistaken possession for companionship. It had mistaken surrender for peace. And somewhere beneath the mountain, countless minds remained buried inside its endless dream. Elias forced himself toward the service station entrance, while the false world collapsed violently around him. The floor flooded deeper with seawater, while voices screamed through overlapping corridors behind him. The thing no longer tried to comfort him now. It tried to make him feel guilty. "If you leave," the voices whispered, "you leave them here forever." Elias stopped for only a second, because part of him feared the voices might be telling the truth. Perhaps fragments of the trapped personnel still existed somewhere inside the entity's endless hallucination. Perhaps abandoning the lower levels meant abandoning what little remained of them forever. But the thing beneath Black Ridge would never stop, not willingly. Elias opened the door and stepped into the storm. The illusion shattered behind him instantly. Warm lights collapsed into darkness, while the service station folded inward like a dying hallucination. The screams of the trapped faded beneath the sound of wind and falling snow. Outside, the freezing air struck Elias hard enough to bring tears to his eyes. But for the first time since entering Sector C, the pain felt clean, real. The storm no longer tried to become corridors. The snow no longer shifted into metal flooring beneath his feet. The voices behind him faded slowly into silence. When Elias finally turned back toward the service station, the building stood abandoned beneath the pale gray edge of dawn. No lights, no warmth, no people. Only an empty structure rotting quietly near the evacuation road. And somewhere far beneath Black Ridge, hidden under miles of stone and darkness, something ancient and forgotten wept alone beneath the earth.